Boeing does not need any more setbacks.
I'm not going to let this derail the recovery of our company. So
the global economy is in a little bit of a fragile state at the moment, but you know there are a lot of things going on which will survive this what could be a tariff war.
It was only a matter of time before Donald Trump picked another fight with corporate America. And once again, Boeing found itself in the crosshairs.
This morning, new reports put Boeing in the middle of a trade war with China that could have an impact on local jobs.
Bloomberg is reporting that China is telling the country's airlines to refuse deliveries of jets they have ordered from Boeing.
Now to President Trump's trade war with China and its impact on this country's biggest exporter. Yesterday, Bloomberg News reported that Beijing had ordered Chinese airlines to halt deliveries of all Boeing aircraft.
This isn't their first dance. Trump and Boeing have been circling each other like two heavyweight fighters since the moment he stepped into office. But this latest blow-up, it might just be the messiest yet.
Donald Trump's long-standing relationship with Boeing has certainly had more than its share of turbulence, if you will, over the years. But things may have just gotten a little bit bumpier today.
What started as a business decision by Boeing to remain globally competitive has turned into a full-blown political brawl. And when Boeing's CEO hit back, he didn't just defend his company, he wiped the floor with Trump's entire economic vision. Because when it comes to the brutal reality of modern manufacturing, Trump's America First fantasies are running face first into global economics.
But also how the customers are reacting to those tariffs, because there may be a number of airlines around the world who will sit there and say, we're good, we'll fly what we fly until this tariff issue gets straightened out.
And Boeing, one of the last giants of American industry, is now stuck at the intersection of protectionist politics and international survival.
What does this mean for Boeing?
Well, this is likely a big blow for them. I mean, you think about it, they've already had a really tough year with whistleblower accusations, pressure on the stock price. But this is China going after an iconic American company. You said it, they're the biggest exporter in the US, and China's a really big market for them. Over the next 2 decades, they project 20% of their demand is going to come from China. So this represents an opportunity for Airbus, a competitor, to slot in.
Spoiler alert, it's not going well. Not just for Boeing, but for an entire generation of American businesses trying to navigate Trump's tariffs, threats, and made-for-TV tantrums.
So do you think that China will target more American companies? And if they do, how is that going to impact the consumer here?
So this is part of the trade war playbook. This is a non-tariff tool that China can weld, and this was already a concern back in the 2018 trade war. So if they decide to expand the strategy, you could see companies that rely on China for revenue, like Disney, Tesla, Apple, Nvidia, Nike, Starbucks, the list goes on.
Wow.
And, you know, that is something when you think about the impact of the consumer. If they lose revenue in one area, well, they might raise prices in another area, and that sort of trickles down to us.
Yeah, those are big name companies that you showed on the screen that we all know about and use their products.
Exactly.
Here's how it all started again. Boeing made a strategic move, shifting some of its manufacturing to Mexico. Not because they hate America, or want to kill jobs, or destroy freedom, but because aerospace is a global business. Labor, logistics, cost efficiency, and of course customers. These are the real metrics Boeing has to answer to.
We're a strong company, and we're proud of what we do, and we know we do important work around the world, and there is a certain confidence, you know, that comes with that, and I think it's fair to say that's always been, you know, part of who we are as a company. But we also have to realize that in the industry that we're in this aerospace industry, the fact that lives literally do depend on what we do, that demands a certain sense of humbleness in how we do our work and acknowledging that we can always get better. So I would term it a humble confidence.
And when you're competing with China, Europe, and every low-cost manufacturing hub on Earth, sometimes moving a few assembly lines south of the border just makes sense. But then came Trump, like clockwork, red-faced, fist-pounding, ready for a campaign rally moment.
If you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here, we didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart.
He threatened tariff on any Boeing jets made with foreign components.
Moving on to other stories now, President Donald Trump, meanwhile, tweeted that tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods will increase to 25% by Friday, a clear sign that negotiations between Washington and Beijing have a long way to go.
A tax bomb that would basically make every airline in America run screaming to Airbus. It was retaliation, sure, but it wasn't strategy. It was a tantrum dressed up as policy.
As you know, the tariffs are on, and the money is pouring in at a level that we've never seen before. And it's going to be great for us. It's going to be great for other countries. We've been ripped off and abused by countries for many years with the tariff situation. They've used tariffs against us. We didn't use tariffs against them or in any way. I mean, we just didn't use them of any monumental proportion. And so we are doing it now.
And Boeing's CEO, he didn't blink. Instead of rolling over, Boeing's leadership made their position crystal clear. We're not in the business of playing politics. We're in the business of building airplanes. And in this global economy, the idea that you can manufacture everything within one country's borders is pure fantasy.
I will say that 80% of the airplanes we deliver, the commercial airplanes we deliver, are outside of the United States. So free trade is very important to us. And 80% of the content of those airplanes, it comes out of the United States. So we really are the ideal kind of an export company where we're outselling internationally. It's creating U.S. jobs, long-term, high-value U.S. jobs. So it's important that we continue to have access to that market and that we don't get in a situation where certain markets become closed to us.
While Trump's out there shouting about tariffs, Boeing's CEO, Dave Calhoun, is quietly cleaning up the wreckage. Trump's trade war, it slammed Boeing hard. Chinese airlines stopped accepting deliveries. Planes worth millions got grounded, and orders vanished overnight. But instead of crying foul on Twitter or blaming unfair trade, Calhoun rolled up his sleeves. He's already repossessing the planes China rejected, rerouting them to new buyers, and keeping production alive.
You're taking back some planes that were supposed to be going to China. They were ordered by Chinese airlines. And you've got a number that are either in production or in the order book. How many will you take back, and what do you do with the ones that are starting production but they're not yet ready to be delivered?
Yeah, Phil, we have 3 airplanes that we had in China ready for delivery. I think we've got 2 of those already back, and we're bringing the 3rd airplane back. They have, in fact, stopped taking delivery of aircraft due to the tariff environment. We have roughly 50 airplanes in our plan this year going into China, so we're going to be pretty pragmatic with what we do here. For those airplanes that haven't been built yet, we'll be looking to maybe redirect those to other customers. For the airplanes that have been built, we call it remarketing. There's plenty of customers out there who are looking for the MAX aircraft.
When asked about the ongoing tariff impact, Calhoun made it clear Boeing's absorbing the costs, managing supply chains, and staying on track for positive cash flow.
And then the question becomes the tariffs that are being put in place, whether it's USMCA related here in North America or foreign production, like you get the wings for the Dreamliner from Japan. Right. How much is this impacting the cost? If this goes on for the rest of this year, will you be able to bear the impact cost-wise?
Yeah, we think we'll be able to manage this within our cash flow plan, and it won't deteriorate from that. Recognize that there are drawbacks on some of the tariffs. So the tariffs we're paying, for example, in Japan and Italy, for those airplanes that we deliver outside of the U.S., we're able to draw that back. And 80% of our aircraft right now are going outside of the U.S. So we think we'll be able to manage through the input tariff environment. The bigger issue is making sure that our supply chain stays healthy and we continue to see the supply chain making the deliveries, and the tariff environment doesn't slow things down in the supply chain. We haven't seen that yet, but we're really watching.
And that's a possibility, that somebody farther down the line says, I can't pay this.
Right.
And if they don't produce, then you can't produce, right?
Yeah, and that's more a continuity of supply issue than it is the actual 10% tariff. So one of the things we're doing is working with our suppliers to see if we can't help them also with this tariff drawback environment, and maybe utilize our drawback ability to help them also get recovery.
In other words, he's doing what Trump promised, but never delivered. protecting American jobs and exports without the theatrics. Because let's be honest, Trump's tariff tantrums created the crisis, but Calhoun's steering Boeing through it.
How long do you wait?
Well, we're working with our customers right now. We're not going to wait too long. I'm not going to let this derail the recovery of our company. So we'll give the customers an opportunity. If they want to take the airplanes, that's what we'd prefer to do. But if not, we're going to remarket those airplanes to people who want them.
That's the difference between a CEO and a showman. And that's what made Trump really lose it. This is classic Trump economics. A world where tariffs fix everything and supply chains are just liberal conspiracies. But in the real world, tariffs are a tax that gets passed down to the very workers Trump claims to be protecting. Because if Boeing gets slapped with a 200% tariff, they don't just eat that cost, they pass it on to airlines, to consumers, to downstream suppliers.
Looking at additional fleet, bearing in mind that we are looking now into the mid-30s, simply because the manufacturers are not in a position really to offer many new aircraft to any client before the turn of this decade. So you need to look at locking in positions for both Boeing and Airbus, given the ability to meet the current backlog and get that sorted out.
Which means higher prices, delayed production, and yes, job losses right here at home. So the very policy meant to bring jobs back to America actually risks pushing them out faster. And here's the thing, Boeing isn't alone.
My question is, how are the tariffs going to affect families? My daughter is a working mom of 3, ages 15, 12, and 9. Another person asks, who do you think will pay for the tariff increases? They're talking about automobiles, but consumer or manufacturers. Will manufacturers eat those increases? So, I mean, to the extent that you can, try to field all of these and bring it together for us.
Yeah, so the tariffs will create a tax burden on the U.S. economy, and it will be shared by workers and by business owners. Some companies may be able to pass their tariff costs on to retail prices. Others won't. They'll have to eat that cost. It reduces their revenues, their profits, which means they might have to cut hiring. They might have to cut returns to shareholders. So in either way, whether the cost is passed forward or passed backward, it's American workers and American business owners who bear that burden.
Trump's trade war logic didn't just hit one company. It triggered a chain reaction across American industry that left even the most iconic brands scrambling for cover. Take Harley-Davidson. Nothing screams red-blooded American freedom louder than a Harley, right? But back in 2018, when Trump slapped tariffs on European steel and aluminum,
We want a lot of steel coming into our country, but we want it to be fair, and we want our workers to be protected, and we want, frankly, our companies to be protected.
the EU fired back with tariffs of their own, specifically targeting U.S. exports like bourbon, and you guessed it, motorcycles.
Unis et solidaires.
Europe is united and firm. We've worked in an extremely intensive manner in recent weeks to avoid the increase in tariffs, to allow for an evolution towards freer markets, but we are also prepared to react.
Harley was suddenly looking at a 31% tariff on bikes exported to Europe, their second largest market. So what did they do? They announced they'd shift some production overseas to avoid the hit. Trump predictably exploded, called it a betrayal, urged supporters to boycott.
The US motorcycle company Harley-Davidson announced on Monday that it's moving production for some of its products outside of the United States to avoid EU tariffs. President Trump has slammed the decision, calling it a surrender.
A Harley-Davidson should never be built in another country, never. Their employees and customers are already very angry at them. If they move, watch, it will be the beginning of the end. They surrendered, they quit. The aura will be gone and they will be taxed like never before. Trump said in a tweet. But Harley's leadership made the math simple. We're not leaving America. We're avoiding a financial bloodbath. Then there's Ford. Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs raised the cost of raw materials practically overnight. Ford said it cost them billions.
But have you conveyed to President Trump personally how much this would hurt Ford and relative to foreign automakers in this country?
Well, look, Phil, as you said, if this persists, this tariff persisted with Mexico and Canada, it would mean billions of losses for the domestic car industry, huge impact for jobs in the U.S. And the administration knows that, as well as congressional leaders. They know that Ford is the most American car company, we produce the most, and they have committed to us to strengthen our industry and not weaken it. So we expect them to work through these policy ins and outs. As far as tariffs are concerned, we want a comprehensive policy, not just towards Mexico and Canada. We understand all the pressures on the border and with drugs, but the reality is, Hyundai, Kia, and Toyota can import millions of vehicles through South Korea and Japan without these tariffs. We need a comprehensive look at such a tariff change.
That's not a rounding error. That's the profit margin of entire vehicle lines. So the company scrapped plans to bring certain models to the US, like the Focus Active, which they had hoped to import from China.
We were profitable in China. We decided a couple years ago, we saw this price war coming in China, and we went to a low capital strategy with export into some of our international markets. We now made almost $1 billion in China, and actually the leader of that business is now going to be leading our whole international group. Look, those are very fit companies, BYD, etc. They're in a price war now in their home market, but that fitness is going to show up on our doorstep quickly here around the globe, and it's on us to be fully competitive with the Chinese on cost. They get a lot of subsidies from the government, so we have to work with our government to make sure it's a fair playing field. We're confident that we can do that with the new administration and congressional leaders, but this is a competitive threat we have never seen in the auto industry.
Trump cheered that decision until Ford admitted the real reason wasn't patriotism, it was survival. They were priced out of their own market. And Caterpillar? The heavy machinery giant said steel tariffs were chewing into their profits, forcing them to raise prices. That, in turn, hit demand.
I mean, you guys dodged a bullet with the Canadian and the Mexican tariffs being at least postponed for 30 days. But have you conveyed to President Trump personally how much this would hurt Ford and relative to foreign automakers in this country?
Well, look, Phil, as you said, if this persists, this tariff...
They warned investors that their cost of production was rising faster than they could keep up, meaning fewer machines sold, fewer jobs secured, and more pressure on international competitiveness. And that's from a company that builds the literal backbone of America's infrastructure. And let's not even talk about Emirates.
Well, yeah, it was a rough week for the market, especially blue chip names that populate the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Now, really, it was a confluence of trends that slammed that index, which barely avoided a ninth straight losing session. The entire market today, though, was able to limp into the weekend. Sellers did step in at the last moment. Now, here's the good news. The S&P 500 proved that it could rally without technology or financials, which, by the way, are about 40% of the total weighting, so it's important that they're engaged. Energy rallied. The West Texas Intermediate rallied more than 5.5%. This is OPEC hiking its official output this morning, less than people thought. And then later in the session, we learned U.S. oil rig count was unchanged. That remains flat over the past 4 weeks. Now, the question, of course, is can the big losing sectors of 2018, energy, materials, industrials, can they regain some traction? Remember, materials, they've been weighed down by International Paper and Freeport-McMoran, but the industrials look very intriguing because think of these names that have dragged them down. Caterpillar, Boeing, Parker Hughes, Parker Hannifin.
Across the board, industries from agriculture to auto parts to energy were forced to play tariff whack-a-mole. Some managed to pivot, others took the hit. But the common thread, Trump's trade war injected uncertainty, increased costs, and punished the very companies he claimed to be protecting. And this was his only justification for the absolute mess.
The higher the tariff, the more likely it is to have them come into the country.
The higher the tariff, the more you're going to put on the value of that piece, those goods, the higher people are going to have to pay in shops.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, as you know, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10%, when you collect it, is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in.
In industry after industry, CEOs are being forced to choose, stay loyal to an economic policy that punishes them, or do what's necessary to survive globally. And the result? Trump labels them traitors to America. Meanwhile, other countries are more than happy to welcome that capital, those factories, and those jobs. This is where things get philosophical, because what we're really seeing is the collision between nationalist ideology and economic reality. Trump wants America to manufacture everything, employ everyone, and depend on no one. It sounds great, it polls well, but it's just not how the world works anymore.
And I know that people are making a lot of that, but to me, it's like we're embarking on a once in 100 year. We're going back to the way things were. You heard it in the speech, pre-1913. So of course we're kind of making it up. There's not really a playbook for this.
Well, here's the thing, Kelly. You and I and the entire all of Wall Street and the country, we were braced for something that might resemble and might be defensible, if arguable, as reciprocal tariffs.
Boeing doesn't just sell planes in America, it sells them in Asia, Europe, South America, and the Middle East. And to compete globally, it has to operate globally. Tariffs don't change that. Tweets don't change that. Reality doesn't bend just because the MAGA base wants it to. So when Boeing's CEO pushed back, he wasn't just defending a factory move. He was defending the entire model of modern capitalism, one that's messy, interconnected, and brutally competitive. He didn't attack Trump personally, but he made it clear that Boeing's future depends on strategy, not slogans. That they'll continue to make hard decisions based on global economics, not campaign trail sound bites. And in doing so, he became a rare thing in today's America, a corporate leader willing to call out the emperor's economic nudity. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is watching, and not kindly. Because when Boeing, the crown jewel of US manufacturing, gets threatened by its own government for acting like a global company, it sends a chilling message. America is no longer a stable partner. Business decisions can now be vetoed by political theater. Foreign governments are now thinking twice before signing trade deals. International investors are pulling back. And American allies are wondering, if Boeing isn't safe, who is? This isn't new for Boeing. Let's not forget, under Trump's first term, Boeing took repeated hits, many from Trump himself, and it revived every time.
Does it have any impact to Boeing? Do you foresee any impact to Boeing?
Well, we're keeping a close eye on it. We don't see any immediate significant impact. We're keeping a close eye on some of the metal tariffs. It's an important part of our supply chain, but not a material cost driver for us. And more broadly, the importance of trade relationships around the globe. Very important to us. Relationship with China in particular. And we remain hopeful that the U.S. and China are going to reach a conclusion that's productive for both countries.
He slammed the company for the cost of the Air Force One replacement planes.
No, I'm not happy with Boeing. It takes them a long time to do, Air Force One. We gave that contract out a long time ago. It was a fixed price contract, and I'm not happy with the fact that it's taking so long. We're looking at other alternatives because it's taking Boeing too long. They were supposed to be finished like years ago.
Yeah.
Years ago. Don't forget, I signed that contract during my term, and it was a very good contract. And I took like $1.6 billion off the price. And it was supposed to be done, quickly. Yeah. And it's a long time.
He publicly embarrassed them on Twitter. He pitted them against foreign competitors.
We're getting a new Air Force One if they can ever finish the damn thing. We're getting 2 of them, actually. But we may have to go a different route because it's taken them a long time. We're going to get military that's going to start building. We're going to get people to start building properly again in our country because they don't build properly. This was Boeing.
And during the 737 MAX crisis, not a single word of real support from the White House. Now, in round 2 of Trump's war on Boeing, the damage is piling up. International orders are being reconsidered. Logistics chains are being disrupted. And once again, a pillar of American industry is being made an example of for doing what every other global company does, trying to survive. The only thing Boeing needs is a middle ground for US and China. Perhaps that's too much to ask. So here's the real question.
potential trade war, your relationship with China.
Yeah.
How does that impact your business? Has you seen any impact in your business?
Well, it's an important relationship to us. So we look at the aerospace marketplace, commercial airplanes. The next 20 years, the world needs 41,000 new airplanes.
41,000.
More than 7,000 of those are in China. And so we're doing well in China. Our Chinese airline customers are very important to us. We have a strong China supply chain as well. But it's also important for us to continue to grow jobs here in the U.S. And China's a big part of that.
Who actually benefits from Trump's 200% tariff threat? Not the workers, not the airlines, not the consumers, not even Trump himself once those job losses and price spikes start hitting swing states. The only winner is the illusion that tough talk equals smart policy, that bullying CEOs on Twitter makes America great again. But the illusion is cracking, and Boeing's CEO just shattered it with one bold move, telling the truth. In the end, this isn't just about Boeing. It's about every American company caught in the crossfire between politics and profitability. It's a warning shot. If this is how Trump treats one of the most iconic companies in America, what happens to the rest? Because you can't tariff your way out of global competition. You can't bully your way into economic growth. And you can't America first your way out of a supply chain that wraps around the planet. The question is, will Trump listen? Or will his policies wipe out more American businesses?